Welcome to The Details with Adam Proer and Cecil Walker. This is a podcast where we examine the intersection between solution-focused brief therapy and current topics happening in the world. We do this because we genuinely want the world to be a better place. So enjoy and come and examine the details with us. Cecil, for this first podcast that you and I do together, we should probably start by saying welcome to being here.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and for those of you who have followed the details in the previous 2 seasons, you will know that it was formerly the details with Elliot and Adam, and Elliot has gotten busy and is doing lots and lots of other things. And so we figured it was time to rejuvenate the details, and we thought, who better to help us rejuvenate than you?
Those are pretty big shoes to fill, so I don't know about who better, but I'll give it my all.
We're glad you're here, and we're pretty sure you're up to the task. So just wanted to take a second and have you just introduce yourself. Tell people whatever you want them to know about you.
Like the intro said, my name is Cecil Walker. I am an MFT right here in Atlanta, Georgia. I work in private practice.
For people who might not know, what's an MFT?
Marriage and family therapist.
Okay.
So I think I mostly see individuals, but I also see families and couples as well. When I'm not doing private practice, I'm working with you and working with Elliot and doing all the fun things we do.
Wonderful. Well, we're glad you're here. We also thought this might be a really good opportunity for us because this is such a big change for the details. We thought it might be an important inaugural event to talk a little bit about change and how we as helping professionals help people through change processes, and then maybe also talk a little bit about what change might look like or how others might be able to help facilitate some change. Since you're new, I'm going to just throw out all the hard questions to you.
You sure you want me to come back?
You got big shoes to fill. We're going to jump off with a bang. So if I asked you, what do you make of change? How do you maximize the benefits of change rather than letting change just happen? If I want to have meaningful change, how do I go about doing that? I'm starting small here.
Yeah, exactly. How do I have meaningful change in my life? 10 seconds. Now, those are pretty big questions. I think as you and I have talked about before, change will come automatically. Change happens. I think it's a near impossibility for things to remain exactly the same and stagnant. Even the passing of time, if nothing else, seems to be moving. We are moving through our own lives, and that's change in and of itself. And so when you start to add on, well, how do I harness that change? How do I make sure that the change that happens is meaningful and kind of directs me in a meaningful direction, one that's satisfying or fulfilling to me? As big of a question as that is, I think a huge part of that process is simply assigning, in a very intentional way, assigning purpose to the change that's happening. You look at the change that you're going through, maybe even the change that you're trying to make happen, and you inject it with some type of purpose to it. What difference this makes to your life? Why is that meaningful to you? What can you do in response to this change? All those kinds of things.
I really like those thoughts. I think as you were talking, obviously, as we mentioned before, one of the main purposes of this podcast is to intersect therapeutic or psychological concepts with current events. And as you were talking, a couple of things came to my mind. Change opportunities in this moment. We're at the end of a school year, and so lots of kids are moving from one grade to another grade. Some kids are moving from one school to another school. Obviously, seniors are graduating and moving on to other pursuits, maybe some more school, maybe something else. And so this is a moment in just the life cycle where we're going to celebrate graduates. We're going to celebrate people moving on. One of the things that you said really stood out to me is we can assign purpose to these moments that are just naturally going to happen. At this time of the year, change is just going to happen whether you want it to or not.
Right.
So when you say you can assign purpose to it, what do you mean by that? How do you do that? How do you assign purpose to it?
Well, I don't know what the exact math of it is, but I think somewhere in the equation is just an intentional acknowledgement of here's what this could mean. Here's why embracing this change, or here's why I'm responding to this change in this kind of a way. Here's how I'm surfing the tides of change. onto whatever's coming next. Like you were saying, with this season of graduations that's happening right now, as people are moving from one grade to the next, one school to the next, from high school to college, things like that, that could be something very monumental to people. That means a huge thing in their life. That's a really important, significant moment that they could reflect over for the rest of their lives. Or it could mean close to nothing. It could have really no significant purpose whatsoever. As you know, I'm the seventh of 8 children, and we were all mostly raised by my mother. And so by the time I was graduating high school, not all of my older siblings had graduated high school, but certainly even the ones who didn't participate in the ceremonial, traditional processes of being a high school graduate, going through that last year of school. I don't think they would even object to me saying they kind of tripped out the door anyway. And I, being just a very subdued, calm, cool kid that I wasn't really interested in making a big deal of the ceremony of graduating high school either. But it seemed really, really important to my mom, and she kept injecting into it this purpose of, you're transitioning from being a high school student or being a child into being a young adult who's going to start to blossom into being really, really independent and in charge of where your life is heading. And so she wanted me to take senior pictures, and she wanted me to I objected to the class ring, but all the other things, the yearbook, I probably wouldn't even care to attend that graduation actually, but that was a huge deal to her. She invited all of our family. So many people actually showed up to my graduation. We had a graduation dinner for all of my family members. We sent out cards to family members. And on my own, I know I wouldn't have done that. This could have been just a bump in time that came and went. But to her, this was something really, really purposeful. And she helped me to reorient to see that this does make a big difference. This means I'm having to make decisions now after this point, right? I have to, where am I going to go to college? Where am I going to study and spend beginnings of my young adulthood? And then what are the choices I'm going to make for the directions I'm going to go into? And I think that's a really prime example of, here's how you inject purpose into what you're doing. It's how you look at it, what you say about what this means, and what that means for you then, what you do with that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because as you were talking, I was reminded of my own graduations. Obviously, having gotten a doctoral degree, I've been through several different graduations. But as I look back over those graduations and the ceremonies, and it's interesting because your attire changes from one graduation to another, right? So there's really symbolic meaning in, if you're dressed, obviously if you just look at a bunch of people and they're wearing caps and gowns and those kinds of things, you just take it for what it is, right? But when you get a master's degree, they give you a hood. And so now you have some color on your robe that you didn't have before. And when you get a doctoral degree, they actually put your hood on you as part of the graduation ceremony. So they read your name, and then significant people to your dissertation chair and those kinds of things, they put the hood on you as part of that graduation ceremony. So instead of just walking across, there's a moment of pause and you're getting an additional special recognition. And I was thinking about my own graduation as a doctoral student. As I look back, the thing about that ceremony and that process that's really, really meaningful to me isn't actually the graduation at all, but it was who chose to attend. So I was living in Texas, and I'm one of 5 children. None of my siblings were in Texas. My parents didn't live in Texas. But each one of my siblings, they were all married, they all had children, they were all living their lives. They lived around the United States in various states. Each one of them chose to come to that ceremony. And so they came from
all of your siblings?
4 different states. Wow. Yeah. So
their families?
No, just my siblings,
okay.
Which in and of itself was kind of unique. We had never all been just my siblings together. And obviously my wife, and at that point I had then 2 children. Mm-hmm. So my wife and 2 children were there, but they were the only kids who were there. Everyone else were my parents and just my siblings. I was graduating actually in December, which was kind of an unusual time to graduate. So it was happening right before Christmas. So one thing that my siblings did is they brought with them, we were staying in a hotel, and they brought with them our Christmas stockings from when we were kids. And my mom filled them up with traditional things that we had always gotten in our stockings at Christmas time. And I remember the meaning of that event was the end of a particular era of my life, but it was meaningful because the people who decided to come and spend that time made it meaningful. And they we were celebrating something, obviously an event of me graduating, but we were celebrating in some sense kind of a milestone of our family. And I think that when you were talking about putting on purpose, it became something that in that moment I was carrying the mantle of education. My family comes from a lot of education. We have lots of degrees. And so a graduation in and of itself wasn't what was meaningful to us. It was a mark that we as a family had succeeded in a particular area. I think that's what can be infused in these points of change. We can rally around each other, that we can support each other, that we can say, like, change moments can be difficult, change moments can be scary, change moments can mean ending everything that is familiar and entering into what's unknown. And to be surrounded in that moment by people who cared about me, who loved me, who had sacrificed to be there, it just created a moment where it was, in some sense, send you off into the next part in a way that feels really comfortable and it feels really familiar. And what could have been a really challenging, trying time, all of a sudden wasn't.
I think that's a beautiful sentiment that you were able to mark that as this is a graduation in your family of, in some kind of sense. But that thing that you said here at the end is kind of brings me to a question that I have that I'm sure lots of people probably listening have too, is if change is inevitable, if change is constant, and if there is a bit of hesitation that tends to sometimes come with change, people say we're resistant to change or change is hard. How do you help someone accept change as something good, or even see the potential in change, to say that this moment of change has a lot of potential? Here's what it could be. How do you help someone navigating change take on perspective like that?
I think that's an excellent question. I think there are naturally changes where we infuse that positive meaning. Oftentimes when people choose to get married, that's a change from being single to being married, and we infuse really positive meaning into that. People have a baby. Oftentimes, that's a really meaningful moment that we attribute positive change to. Graduation is another. You've succeeded in this way. You're ready to move on and to be successful. And so I think in areas where we don't naturally infuse that positive meaning, we can learn from those other events. We can say, why do we attribute positive meaning to getting married? Why do we attribute positive meaning to graduation? Could equally be a sad thing. I'm stepping away from my immediate family if I'm getting married. I'm leaving my friends behind, and this is a moment where we'll probably scatter, and we may never get back together in this particular way ever again. So those moments could equally be moments of despair or sadness. We as a society have kind of infused positive meaning into it. I think that shows that we really have power to determine meaning. That something that could naturally be a scary moment or a scary change. I think about, again, my own family and my wife, Becca, being diagnosed with breast cancer. That's a scary change.
Yeah.
But we could purposefully infuse positive meaning into that and say, okay, this is an opportunity where we'll learn a lot. This is potentially an opportunity where we as a family could pull together and we could be a stronger unit, where we could show each other support, which absolutely happened within our family. So I think much of how we make meaning of the change is oftentimes a deliberate decision. And so I think one of the things I would say is we deliberately decide, I'm going to look for positive change. I'm going to infuse positive meaning in this. I think the other thing that helps in moments like this is leaning on a support system. What really made my graduation a meaningful experience is that my family came together and they were kind of helping me then push into the next event. And I think even in scary moments, if we can find a way to reach out to meaningful others, maybe that is family, but it could be friends, it could be peers, it could be anybody. But if we found a way to reach out and to say, could you help me navigate this change process? Now it can also simultaneously, it could still be scary, it could still be difficult, but it could also be a point where lots of people reached out to help me. Lots of people came to support me. I learned lots of things from how other people infused meaning into this process.
Yeah. I really like both components of that answer. The first part, and almost in the second part as well, it gives bit of power to the person standing in front of that moment of change, and essentially says, if you should notice and take use of that power to, like you said, be really intentional about what this could do for you, what you could do with this moment. That can make a big difference in how you experience it. And then to your second point, I think that is really true, that people make meaning, right? Like the convergence of our experiences of a moment make meaning. And I think of that kind of thing all the time. If you just look at holidays or even life events, like you were saying, these are days that could go by and mean absolutely nothing. But when we come together and say they do mean something, and here's what they mean, and here's what we do on those days and those occasions, that's where meaning comes from. And those are some of the holiest moments of everyone's life, right? Those are the most important moments of the year. And I think that's not solely, but a large portion of the meaning that is there is because it's shared with other people. There's people who say, we're all going to recognize this as being something important that we want to set aside.
So let me ask you maybe a challenging question, because another...
The other ones are easy.
Because another one of those current event things that's happening right this moment is that large parts of the country are preparing or participating in primary elections. I know here in Georgia, our primary election is happening any day now. And I think oftentimes, so this also marks moments of change. In these moments of change, there's an equal opportunity for things to get contentious. There's an equal opportunity for me to be disappointed by the outcome. There is an opportunity for me to be disillusioned by what this process is. So what happens when you feel like you don't really have the control over the outcome, but change is going to happen no matter what? I might get a small piece of a say, but in the grand scheme, I have very little control in the overall event. How do you help people navigate this kind of change where maybe I feel like the control is either slipping away or I never even had the control to begin with? So how could I possibly infuse positive meaning into this?
That's an excellent question. In moments like that, and I'm speaking from a very personal perspective, I think, too. I don't know where I would have found authority to say this is how all people should look at moments like that. But in moments like that, if I get a bit of a feeling of helplessness, or I don't have control or the control that I want, or these events and moments are coming at me and it doesn't feel like there's much I can do about the outcome of them, that really is just a sign to me that I need to look for where I do have control, where I do have some say over the meaning and the progress of how things play out. And so if it feels like I'm in a really negative situation with my back against the wall and there's not much I can do about it, I'm not going to try hard to overcompensate or even just feel like I'm crumbling in the face of that. Where I'm going to put my effort is, where can I have control? And what have I not looked at yet that I can start to say, here's what I need, here's what I can do. Since we're talking about political things and election cycles, 2020 was a big election year, and that was a very strange time for everyone. We're dealing with the pandemic. We're dealing with racial tension and upheaval, social unrest is how a lot of headlines put it. And of course, one of the biggest elections that this country has seen in quite a long time. And I think that's one of the most helpless moments that people could have faced in this country. We were stuck indoors. So many people were jobless. The economy was doing flops every other week. And we were all facing, what's the outcome of this election going to be? Yet that somehow transformed into a public commitment to social values that I had never really seen in this country before. The protests that happened, the ways that on social media everyone was just proclaiming what their social values were, their political values were, in a way that said, we want progress, we want an advancement towards the things we believe in. And there was such a strong convergence on that. It suddenly showed me how much power we have collectively that I would have been so hopeless about a year before that. When it came to those really tense subjects, I'm speaking specifically about some of the racial things that we were reconciling with during the summer, I wouldn't have been that hopeful that there would have been that much momentum behind progress in that kind of a thing. And I don't think we solved everything, obviously, or that we did everything practically and effectively. But what I saw was a fervor for progress. I saw people wanting to do something about the situation that we were in. And that showed there is power in what we can do. There's a lot more to this scenario, this moment of change, than we might have originally felt like there was.
Yeah, what I really like about what you just said too is that the outcome doesn't necessarily impact the meaning that can be made.
Right.
The outcome we may not have much control over at all, but I can say in some sense, I can evaluate, how do I want to participate in this moment? What do I want this moment to mean for me?
Exactly.
How do I live according to my own values in this particular moment of time, regardless of what the outcome is? And I think there's really some power to be had there of self-discovery, of self-meaning making, of this is the kind of person that I want to be, regardless of what happens at the end of this.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful thing that, it really can determine the direction that we go in. If we think of it on a personal timeline almost, your life could even be totally different if these really big moments, you decide to make meaning of it in one way or not. Or even if you submit and say, I don't have any power in this, I don't have any meaning to make of this. And that, I think, ultimately take your life in another direction. I think there's a reason why in every origin story that we see in every movie, superhero, whatever, there's a tragedy or some really difficult situation somewhere away in the beginning. And it's a movie worth watching because they take it on to say, here's the values I have now. Here's the person that I want to be. Here's the route that I want to go. It's not a movie if they say, well, that really sucked and I'm a nobody now and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just so grateful that you're here. And I think we've really kind of hit some really important things about change. We would love to hear what everybody else has to think about change. We don't think we have capital on the market or the monopoly on the market. So let us know what you think about change. We would love to hear it. This podcast has been sponsored by the Solution Focused Universe, which is a global community dedicated to the growth of professionals who want to master the solution-focused approach. The SFU is home to the world's largest library of solution-focused material, which is updated on a monthly basis. Please join this community and the members and the solution-focused leaders in coaching calls and in private Facebook groups as we discuss anything and everything as it's related to solution-focused brief therapy.